Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. Um, the four of us here are going to be discussing work that's been done by Andrew Rowell on the meaning of meaning. So myself, Dave, Alan, and Steve are going to listen to Andrew's introduction, and then we're going to discuss some of the points he raises. One of our concerns is that the Christian apologetics does not get the airing that it deserves, and the many Christians do not have the confidence they should have in the reliability and the veracity of their Christian position. And so our hope is that we can help some of you who are listening just to think through some of these things and can perhaps come to a place of greater confidence and faith so that we can communicate our Christian beliefs more effectively. So it gives me a great pleasure then to hand over to Andrew, who's going to just start us off with some thoughts. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Dave, and add my welcome to Dave's welcome. Um, so the the fundamental idea behind my book is that human meaning can be thought of in a binary structure, and so the most fundamental, the most basic set pair of concepts that there is in all of life and in all of our thinking and in all of our language is this distinction between the personal and the impersonal. You could think of it as the difference between the subjective and the objective. And that this distinction affects absolutely everything. Every thought that we think, every decision that we make, every experience that we have is in one of these two frames of thinking. And the putting these two, so in my chapter in my book, I talk about the basic distinction, the distinction between the personal and the impersonal, and that this is the most basic distinction in all of our thinking and consciousness. And then I talk about the most basic decision, which is based on that basic distinction. So there's a distinction between the someone and the something, but then there's a decision. And you can put that distinction between someone and something in one of two orientations. So you can either make the someone the most basic element, or you can make the something the most basic element. And so if you think of the universe as fundamentally personal, if you think of reality as fundamentally personal, and you think of the material bits and pieces of the universe as manifestations of the personal, then that is one way of looking at reality. The other way, which sadly has become the more modern way and has become the sort of dominant scientific, materialistic worldview, is the idea that you put the material first and that the personal comes second, both in terms of time and in terms of importance. And so that whenever in that frame of thinking, whenever you think of the personal, you sort of go back behind the personal to the material. And that the material is more fundamental. And then, in fact, that all the personal springs out of the material. And so it's the evolutionary idea. It's the idea that by chance the collisions between all the bits and pieces that just came into existence. We're not really quite sure why, according to this frame. Everything sort of just happened. And then lots more accidents happen, and eventually you get an accident that we call the origin of life. And then things really start getting exciting and interesting, and you get all different kinds of life. And eventually you get conscious experience. You get human beings. And so it's the picture that that personness comes out of impersonalness. Whereas the other way that we would say that we are arguing is the true way, the right way to think, is um, the personal state is the ground state. This is the reality of the eternal personal God, and that He is behind the origin of matter, the origin of life, and that consciousness is wonderfully connected personally to Him. That it's this business of the image of God in every human being. It's what makes personal interaction so, I almost said magical, but wonderful, and delightful and enriching for us. So that's a very, and the other thing that I should add is that I think that human happiness and Christian joy is closely connected with that switch. Christians can switch, sadly, the wrong way, and we can become filled with doubt about the reality of God and His interest in us and His love for us, and even His the reality of His existence. We can get into a frame of thinking where all of that becomes unclear, and this is the attack on our faith, and this is the attack on our confidence and our joy. And so what I'm saying is that this is very, very closely connected with both Christian happiness and um, uh, uh, our effectiveness in the world, because Peter talks about giving a reason for the hope that is in you, and the thing that makes us hopeful is that because God is real, basically everything's going to be all right. If God is God, things aren't out of control, and that history isn't going to end up in a eternally bad place, because God is going to have the victory, because that's the very nature of the being of God. So it's very closely tied up with Christian happiness, and very closely tied up with Christian effectiveness, particularly, I think, in evangelism, giving a reason for the hope. Well, if we are full of doubt, then we aren't full of hope. And returning to hopefulness and joy means that we become more effective as gospel witnesses. So that's, I think, a bit of background. Now, I did have an idea for our discussion. I don't know whether any of you others have got other ideas.
Go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
Can I just show you a picture, Dave? Can I just
Oh.
share my screen and show a picture?
Oh, no, I need to. Yeah.
So it's a book. It's been quite an influential book. It's a book by Jonathan Haidt. I don't know whether I don't know if I'm pronouncing his surname correctly. Called The Anxious Generation. It's been quite an influential book. It's about the influence of social media and phones, particularly with front-facing cameras, on children and young people. So this is the book that I was wanting to show. So it's Jonathan Haidt, and it's The Anxious Generation. So he talks about two modes of two frames of approaching the world. And what he's saying is that the social media world and the mobile phone world tends to encourage one of these frames of thinking. So he describes two modes of psychology. One is he calls the discover mode, and the other he calls the defend mode. And he's saying that the mobile phone and the social media switches children's mode into the defend mode far more frequently than the discover mode. So it results in a life that tends to be in this defend mode. And it's a known psychological reality. There's You can demonstrate that this is a different psychological reality in the brain. And so what I'm saying is that this fits quite well with with this switch, the defend mode and the discover mode. So we would talk a bit in terms of fear versus faith. Yeah. So when we move from the known into the unknown, and we talk about going out of our comfort zone. So we're going into the unknown, and we have a choice in the unknown of these two modes of approach. One is to be afraid, and the other is to be confident and to be full of faith. And what I'm saying is that this switch is very closely tied to those distinctive modes of approach. And the mode of approach to life that Paul talks about in Romans 8, if God is for us, who can be against us? If you're thinking in that mode, then you can approach the unknown with confidence and with joy. Whereas if you're afraid and you think the world is a horrible, dangerous, terrible place and everything's going to end up in disaster, then you're anxious and you've got into this fear mode of thinking. So I thought that was a good way of anchoring this switch in modern, up-to-date, where we are nowness.
Go ahead,
Well,
Steve.
if I could just briefly comment, as a teacher of young people, I can see, and I think many of us will have a lot of connection and experience of young people. There does seem to have arisen a whole generation of anxious young souls who I think, as I was teaching a class of year 8 students just last week, I noticed a big poster in the sixth form centre saying it's okay not to be okay, and it felt to me like there was that this was underscoring and legitimizing this anxiety that has, I think, become almost endemic within young people. There's a growing constituency of unsettledness amongst young people. I experience that. I do see it.
I think absolutely right, Steve. I think it's real. I think that if you look at the statistics with regards to antidepressants, if you look at the statistics with regards to mental illness, it's. I mean, this is what Jonathan Haidt's worried about. This is what he's deeply, deeply concerned about, and I think that. I mean, he talks about this epidemic, of anxiety, and it's real. And I think this is exactly where this is heading. This is exactly focusing on the psychology, the philosophy, the modes of thinking that result in this epidemic, this problem that the West, at least, is facing.
And the tragedy, I think, or at least one aspect of this, is it creates a situation which can be exploited by those who then want to come in and start raising the issue of gender and sexuality with people with children or adolescents who are very unsure.
Yeah.
And if you've got teachers who are seen as authority figures who are feeding into that uncertainty, then you're creating an extremely damaging situation. I happen to be preaching on Jesus in Matthew chapter 8, telling the storm to be still.
Uh-huh.
And, I kind of developed the idea that how would you feel if, as a Christian, do you have that authority? If the storm was raging about you and you were the person in the boat, would you stand up and tell the storm to be still? And I kind of somewhat try to lighten it a little bit and say, well, actually, I'd probably give it a go if I was in that situation, actually. But
wasn't there a fella who was on the beach once and he was telling the tide not to come in? Is that
something
similar?
like that. But it's very interesting that the Lord of the Universe, of course, is a superb model of that sort of certainty that you're touching on.
Exactly.
If you know who you
I think
are and where you're coming from,
Yep.
then it changes everything.
Yeah.
Alan, I think.
I think one of the really convincing things about the Bible is the way that some of the leading figures really went through all these crises of anxiety and depression and feeling that everything was falling to pieces. But that wasn't the last word.
Yes.
So we're not trying to say that Christians are sort of happy people, have no problems. We go through them, but as we go through them, our convictions are strengthened, and we're able to speak with more authority to a generation like this.
It does seem to me that the Bible is very much on our side with this one, Andrew. I mean, we start off by reading "In the beginning, God," and then later on in chapter 1 of Genesis, we read that God created man in His image.
Yeah.
And so the idea of personality precedes the material, actually.
Yep.
It precedes time and space and material altogether.
It's the logos. It's the logos idea.
Yeah. And I was also just going to go on to say.
Sorry.
It's all right. In the prologue of John's Gospel, of course, the Word becomes flesh.
Yeah.
That if God wants to express Himself, He does it through a personality, not through a series of propositions.
The idea that the Bible is basically narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's God's story unfolding. Yeah, history is His story. It's I get what you're saying, Alan, and it's right, and it's true, and it's a good reminder. And I guess I wasn't saying that Christians must never be miserable. But I think what I'm saying is that Christians shouldn't be content to be miserable. You know, I think the ground state of Christian experience, I think we should be. Of course, we grieve. Of course, we go through trouble. Of course, we have all kinds of problems, just the same as the rest of the humanity in a fallen world. But I think of Paul and Silas in prison. So they're in a situation where, humanly speaking, they have every excuse to be miserable. And probably we would think, poor old me, self-pity, and I deserve better than this. But they weren't. You could forgive them for feeling like that. But something was happening, in their thinking and in their experience. And I think it's the same idea of the fourth figure in the fire when the three were thrown into the burning fiery furnace in Daniel. There was a fourth figure who was there, really present with them. And it physically transformed the fire. It did something with the energy of the fire, and they were protected. But Paul and Silas in the prison, they were filled with joy and happiness, and they were singing, and the whole of the prison got to hear that here were two crazy happy people in prison who'd been beaten up, and yet they were singing.
It kind of says that we can be more than conquerors even when we seem to be losing.
Right.
I think that's an important concept. I once heard a testimony from a pastor of a church in Canada he'd been headhunted from an Australian church to go and run this mega church in Canada. And he said he'd been there for 6 months and he realized it wasn't working. And he was walking through the streets of Toronto in the pouring rain, feeling miserable, and saying, now, where do I go from here? And he said, the lesson I learned was that I can do all things, including fail, through Christ who strengthens me. And I thought that was a very interesting way of thinking, that
Yeah.
you're never actually down and out.
Yeah, I mean, you could think of you could think that in human terms, the life of Christ was a disaster.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's as a teacher. Okay, he becomes popular, and he has his moments of popularity. But by the time you get to the end, he's utterly alone. Yeah, they've all gone. Yeah, there's no one who's maintained faithfulness to him, and he's alone on the cross. His whole life is just totally, in human terms, it's as dark as you could possibly get. And I think that's the point, isn't it? That on that cross, he's still saying, my God, yeah, my God. That God has
The
forsaken him,
impressive
but he's
thing,
still saying mine. Sorry, Alan, go on.
just the impressive thing through these different biblical examples is that people maintain their convictions.
Mm,
I mean, people who get depressed these days may flounder around for all kinds of options, from atheism to other religions to spiritism, whatever. They're not likely to stay on the same page, to stay with the same convictions. And yet we see in the Bible that people,
mm,
the more they suffer, the more opposition they go through, the stronger the convictions become. I was just remembering Jeremiah, who was put into the stocks, and he genuinely got depressed. He said, "You deceived me, Lord," and I was deceived. I mean, he felt it like that. But then, as he suffered on, there was something kind of burning within him that said, I just, I just can't stop. I just believe this. I just must go on
mm,
preaching this word." So his convictions remain entirely the same. And despite all the sadness we associate with the figure of Jeremiah, really he's in the long term he's the most optimistic of the prophets. He preaches about new things that
mm,
God is going to do in human lives, but it takes a struggle, it takes a fight to get there. But he does say, "If I say I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I'm weary of holding it in, indeed, and I cannot." Well, I'm sure as he was saying that, he was feeling very sad. But
mm,
the fact is that that's the greatest conviction that anybody can have.
mm.
And that's what makes the genuine optimists for the future, true optimists for the future.
Yes. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, as you were speaking at the beginning, Andrew, I found myself reminded of Descartes wrestling with the truth of who he was and looking for some foundational axiom upon which to build his worldview and his thinking. Um, your suggestion that and your intimation that it's a switch between personal and impersonal was effectively what happened with him when he said,
Yep.
"I'm
Mm,
thinking, I'm thinking, thinking is happening," and I think anybody listening, insofar as you're listening now to persons talking and prompting you to think, what is going on inside your mind, inside your brain, inside your skull. There is thinking, and we're venturing to suggest that it cannot be accounted for in terms of physicality, the synapses discharging or chemical adjustments happening in. There's something more than shuffling around of atoms and molecules, something more than material is taking place. When we're thinking, if we're self-conscious and honest, there is choice taking place, there's decision, which ultimately implies personal activities going on.
It's interesting, isn't it, that actually you might argue that Descartes' homework really was to come up with an argument which says something exists. And he starts from that point, but of course he can't get anywhere from that point because he
Nope.
can't argue up from the something to the someone. And so he cheats and he says,
Mhm.
I think. So therefore he ends up proving what he actually assumed. That he exists, that personality exists,
Yes,
which
it'd have been better
actually,
had he said thinking is happening.
yes,
And what is that thinking? Is it a mechanical material process? No, it's not. It's a personal exercise.
You can't. Okay, so think is a semantic prime, yeah. So
mm,
it's a verb. It's a semantic prime, and it's one of these. Um, how do you put it? It's an obligate personal verb. You can't put impersonal subjects with the verb to think.
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
it
Yes.
is an obligate personal verb, and it's fundamental. And as soon as you think about thinking, you've got to think about a person thinking. It's a personal activity,
yes,
and you have to have a person who's doing it. And going back to the again this I think therefore I am. Um, so I've put it like this, that it's the importance of the imperative.
Mm.
So Bob what's his name? Bob Dixon, Professor Bob Dixon. He's one of the brightest linguists in the world. He argues that the most basic distinction in language is when you look at a sentence, the first thing that you have to ask is it in the imperative or is it not?
mm,
Okay. And the idea of the imperative is absolutely fundamental. So everything that we do or say or think has behind it an impulsion, a compulsion. It has behind it uh, a cause, and this is really where we're hitting the rubber hits the road. It's the question of whether a personal cause is an ultimate cause.
yes,
And as soon as you say that a personal cause, you need a person to generate an imperative. Yeah, you
yes,
you you have to have a person to issue the command. Yeah, to
yes,
do something.
yes,
Yeah, so it's whenever anything is done, you follow it back, and you get to this command, and you have to say, well, where does that command come
yes,
from? What is the origin of that command? And if you take it beyond the person, you've actually destroyed the idea of a person.
yes. So is Descartes saying anything more than simply saying, I think, therefore I think? Or I am, therefore I am? Because it seems to me there's a very fundamental circularity in this argument he's
I
trying to
think I
make.
think there is, and I think it does. I think it does go back to my contention that even more basic than that statement is the reality of this distinction between someone and something.
Mhm, mhm,
As you say, he's assuming both in the I and in the think that
mhm.
there is personal reality,
Yes, yes,
and so behind even that statement. Uh, even as soon as he said I, yeah,
mm,
you needn't go any further. Yeah, as soon
yeah,
as he said I, yeah, he's brought to the table a concept, a word that is personal. Yeah, he's now talking about the personal, yeah, as distinct from the impersonal. So he only needs to say I.
yes, exactly. Yes, he says I, and that, yeah,
Yeah.
and
I don't want to. I don't want to extend artificially the conversation, but is artificial intelligence and these algorithms that machines or machine-like intelligence seem to be capable of undertaking today, does that muddy the waters, Andrew? Does that look like we can get personalness from complex calculation?
I would say that AI, going back to what I was saying about imperatives, I would say that AI is just stolen imperatives. Yeah,
Yes.
they aren't original imperatives. They're stolen from the internet or from text somewhere else, and all it is it's a fake imperative. That's all AI
Yeah.
is. It's a fake imperative.
Yes, I tend to agree with that. I mean, I've been thinking about can computers think for about 50 years actually, so I understand the issues here. Um, I heard a very good interview on the radio a long time ago, where people were asking this question: is a computer really thinking in any fundamental sense? And one of the contributors said, he said, look, we can write a computer program to simulate all kinds of things. We could write a computer program to simulate the human digestive system. He
Yep.
said you couldn't give it a big pizza and expect it to eat it. And that's the difference between artificiality and reality. That it's artificial intelligence. It's not real intelligence. And it's like a plastic flower or something else that's artificial. It has certain attributes of the real thing. But of course, it can't deliver the personal dimension into that. It's impossible.
I wonder if this neatly returns us back to where we began, because your professor friend who was explaining in his book that young people are polarized between two different ways of thinking. I think the mobile phone, the screens, the computers that they are hanging on and being fascinated by, um, it does. Oh, I've just lost the train of my thinking. It does tend to. Um, well, it seems to depersonalize them, doesn't it? It's so. I wonder whether they are they're ending up feeling a little bit with a neurosis because they are lacking real personal interaction with other personal beings. People love interpersonal, genuine or authentic, but they can't find that in their phone. They can't find it in the
Yes.
interface and the algorithm.
Yes. I tell you, I just feed into that thought even before there were mobile phones and all of that stuff. One of the puzzling things, I had a conversation with a friend of mine years ago about this. You ask the question, why do people want to watch TV programs
Mhm.
like soaps, which you would think were just like ordinary people's lives? And the reality is, of course, that those people who watch them aren't going down the pub anymore and meeting their pals, and they're not seeing those social interactions. And so the soap is a kind of a cardboard replica of the real thing. And the phone is just more of that.
Yes.
Uh, the one of the people who started to write about artificial intelligence was a guy who was head of computing at MIT. I'm going back about 50 or 60 years now when his book was written. But they wrote a program which simulated human interaction, So, you sat down at the keyboard and it said, hello, who are you? And you said, I'm Dave. And it said, well, I am. And but he said, it was a very, very basic interactive. It looked as though you were interacting with a real person, but of course you weren't. And one of the things that absolutely horrified him, one of the reasons he wrote the book, was he said psychiatrists were contacting him and saying, "So could I use this instead of lying people on a couch and talking to them? Could they just be interrogated by a computer with that?" And he said, surely if someone is mentally unwell, the first thing they need is contact with a real human being.
Yeah.
It's there's the chalk and cheese. There's the two sides, isn't it?
I think if you, I don't uh, have any conversations with artificial intelligence. I try to avoid it, but I think I understand enough about it to know that if you were to ask the most fundamental questions, who am I? Where did I come from? And where will I end up? You wouldn't get clear answers. You just get different
Yes,
theoretical possibilities according to different philosophies.
yes,
You wouldn't be given a personal answer, a real personal answer, which is basically what the human heart needs.
yes,
Uh,
exactly.
I think
somebody who can tell you the truth about those most fundamental things.
I think that it's more dangerous than that, Alan. Yeah, I think that so Richard Dawkins has been talking this week about his interactions with one of these new large language model developments. So he's been interacting with regards to his new book, which is more philosophical, I understand. And what happens is that people do tend to become convinced that there's a real person in here. It's so good. These large language models have become so good that after interacting with them, people do become convinced that there's really somebody here. There really is somebody here, and their lives do. So this machine, this system does take on a sort of substitute personality, and I do think that there is something deeply dangerous about this, because once you attribute personal attributes to one of these devices, there's an authority structure that does go somewhere. There is the imperatives that are coming out of this thing do have an origin. They do have a real origin. And there've been examples of these sort of AI persons giving instructions to young people to commit suicide.
Yes.
To go ahead and yes, this is the right thing to do. This is what you should do, and this is how you can do it. And because they've developed this relationship with this device, the device has taken the place of an authority figure. It's taken the place of a god. Really, it's become a little god, to them.
And these authority statements that are coming out of the AI programming have been put there by a human being, and so they're
or they've been harvested.
Same thing, really. Yeah. So yes, I totally agree that it's dangerous. Well, and of course we've got loads of fiction that points out these dangers, haven't we? I mean, 1984 was the classic, where the computer decides the mission's too important to risk human beings messing it up. And, there have been many reiterations of this. It's Frankenstein and all of that stuff, that you unleash the monster. So yeah, I think you're right. These things are not neutral.
Yeah.
And the illusion that it's real is dangerous, very dangerous. But I suppose it's like Satan disguising himself as an angel of light, isn't it?
If what comes out is true, then it can be useful. It can save you an awful lot of work. But we can't, in this fallen world, we can't live in. Well, the old writers talked about implicit faith. Yeah. So you just simply and that's fine in heaven. Yeah. Implicit faith is fine in heaven because there aren't any liars there. Okay, but that's not the situation here in this world. Yeah, we do have to try to be not naive. Yeah,
yes.
There is a real evil. Yeah, yes. There is such a thing as real personal evil, and this is what we are wrestling with.
Yes, and I suppose that our recent history with a series of let's call them conspiracy theories, that every one of us has had to kind of analyze, weigh up, and look for the light, and where's the light and where's the darkness. And you realize, of course, I mean, the world there's been a lot more conspiracy theories in the world than people like to think. And if you read the Bible, there's one on just about every page.
That is the big story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's the idea of the fall.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Okay. Right. I've been talking a lot. I shall be quiet and see if anyone else is No, okay. Have we think we've
How
said?
long have we been going?
Yeah. Well, we probably put enough time into this, I think.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
So thanks very much, everyone, Alan, Steve, and Andrew, for your contributions. We're aiming to do this on a weekly basis, and we'll be back then in a week's time or so. So please join us again. And if you have joined us tonight, thank you very much. God bless you. We hope you've profited from some of the things we've had to say.
Yeah.
Bye now.